Hello, and thank you for the invitation to present to you today. My name is Teresa Heeney, and I am the CEO of Early Childhood Ireland. First, some information about our organisation and the childcare sector in Ireland. The latter comes from Pubble, which every year surveys every early years and school age setting to publish a very useful data set for use by policymakers and others. Early years care and education and school age care provision in Ireland is made up of preschools, creches, after school clubs, and we have a host of mixed settings with a range of offerings to children and their families. The development of what is referred to as the childcare sector here has evolved in a fragmented way, both in terms of provision and in policy terms. As of now, there are a myriad of programs and schemes with which our members around Ireland have to engage to implement a highly regulated, complex, and bureaucratic system. At the kind request of the Secretariat, my presentation today draws on Early Childhood Ireland's recently published research entitled Pathways to Better Prospects, Delivering Proper Terms and Conditions for the Early Years Workforce in Ireland, a literature review. The research project investigated how to promote professionalisation for the early learning and care, or ELC, workforce by comparison with other sectors in Ireland, as well as with models in 7 jurisdictions: Australia, New Zealand, Ontario in Canada, Bavaria in Germany, Finland, Denmark, and Norway. This topic is of utmost importance to Early Childhood Ireland, as there is an overwhelming consensus that quality in the early childhood field is linked to the qualifications of the staff who are providing care and education to babies and children. I will focus on the international lessons that can be drawn and on how those lessons can be applied to or adapted in Ireland. In order to do that, it is worthwhile to look at the jurisdictions which, like Ireland, have a significant proportion of private childcare provision, such as Australia and New Zealand. If you are interested in the other jurisdictions, we have provided the Secretariat with a link to the research report on our website. To look first at Australia, where government spending has risen significantly, but it is still below the OECD average. Up to 70% of early childhood workers have pay set by awards. Awards are legal documents outlining minimum paying conditions for groups of workers in an industry or occupation. It sets a wide range of minimum pay rates based on the level and experience of groups of childcare workers. It sets weekly and hourly rates, weekend rates, overtime rates, shift pay, public holiday pay, and a range of allowances. However, the awards usually set pay at levels which are unlikely to attract and retain sufficient workers to meet increasing demand. There is little difference between the minimum rates in the sector and the national minimum wage, and qualified educators are paid half the average weekly earnings of all occupations. Overall, the childcare sector in Australia has experienced considerable problems in relation to staffing, including low paying conditions, insecure contracts, high stress, a significant administrative regulatory burden, and poor morale. New Zealand is considered a top spender on childcare services. The paying conditions of kindergarten teachers is set by a collective agreement which is negotiated between the trade union and the Secretary of Education. Qualified kindergarten teachers have pay parity with primary school teachers, but kindergarten accounts for only 15% of ELC services, and the government is not responsible for the paying conditions of employees in non-kindergarten services. A collective agreement covering staff in approximately 200 independent providers was in place between 2018 and 2019, but teachers in non-kindergarten services did not have pay parity with kindergarten or primary schools, and estimates suggest they earn 24% less. There was no updated collective agreement after 2019 due to inadequate government funding. As a result, problems have emerged in the sector with reports of poor, even harmful quality of ELC provision, significant labour shortages, high turnover, low pay, poor working conditions, precarious contracts, stress, and overwork. In Ireland, the 2020 programme for government committed to the drawing up of an Employment Regulation Order, or ERO, which would determine minimum rates of pay for childcare workers as well as terms and conditions of employment. An ERO is something similar to the Australian award. But the Australian case shows that in the context of a mostly private system which receives low public funding, the only operational minimum rates of pay are not very far off from the existing national minimum wages. And despite the fact that the Australian level of public expenditure is below the OECD average, it is still about 4 times more than here in Ireland. Moreover, New Zealand's case shows that increasing public investment is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for improvement, as this investment will not necessarily be allocated towards workers' pay. On the other hand, Nordic models of childcare provision are generally viewed as the best in the world. They are generally characterised by a universal approach in services with high levels of tax-based financing and public provision. Let us take the example of Denmark. Pedagogues, as they are called, with a bachelor's degree, are the core practitioners in early childhood centres, accounting for almost 60% of the staff. Pedagogues are well-paid professional roles with salaries only minimally lower than a school teacher's salary. Pedagogues and assistants who work full-time, a standard working week, and are granted 6 weeks annual leave, 1 year's paid maternity or parental leave, and have an occupational pension. Pay rates and a wide range of conditions are set via collective agreements. As a result, there are no recruitment issues in Denmark. In 2018 and 19, Ireland's childcare settings had a 24% turnover rate among staff. Given the relevant international experiences, what are the main conclusions and policy recommendations that can be drawn for Ireland? First, it is important to understand how severe the situation is in Ireland. The unacceptable terms and conditions of employment for educators, alongside a lack of defined training and career pathways, have been extensively highlighted by various national reports, and this is also acknowledged by government. Not only are wages low, but there is little scope for wage progression over time. The sector here can also be described as a low hours sector in comparison to others. Despite the fact that this theme has received considerable policy attention in Ireland recently, a lot of the policy action has been focused on increasing qualification levels, which has only had a marginal effect on pay and conditions. There is a fundamental issue in private systems of childcare provision. On the one hand, services are expensive to provide. There are strict regulations on adult to child ratios. Those regulations are extremely necessary to ensure that babies and children receive the best provision. But as a result, the sector needs to employ a high number of staff, which is very costly. The state supports part of these costs with subsidies, but Ireland invests the lowest amount across the OECD. On the other hand, if fees are set as high as they would need to be, then over time parents will tend to care for their children at home, which in reality puts an upper limit on what providers can charge. Therefore, providers in general face low and unpredictable profit margins. This hinders their capacity to pay appropriate wages. There are various ways through which this problem can be tackled. One possible solution is to significantly increase public funding and ring-fence a significant proportion of that funding for workers' pay. However, this option will ultimately be more costly to the government, and it will also perpetuate the administrative burden that providers have to deal with on a daily basis. Moreover, it may not lead to increased wages and sustainability, because reaching the desired outcome will ultimately depend on the efficiency of the policy design. Achieving this efficiency is not a trivial task, as to our knowledge, there are no comparable policies in the world that prove to be successful. Early Childhood Ireland's main conclusion is that radical problems require radical transformation. We support a policy approach that brings Ireland closer to the Nordic model while respecting Ireland's history and established institutions. We advocate for a fully publicly funded system, which we have outlined here. Pedagogically, this does not imply a move from care towards education. The current Síolta and Aistear frameworks would be maintained. Staff would also have funded time to implement a quality system and to engage in research and professional dialogue. They would also participate in accredited CPD, which is fully funded, and all are registered in a professional body. A single agency under the auspices of the DCE-IDY would oversee the whole sector. Among many other attributes, the agency would develop and implement a robust system to monitor and predict supply and demand, child and family needs through community assessment and the analysis of existing national data. Finally, we need some administrative and governance structures at a local level to support the system. Please see our website for more, and thank you again for the opportunity to present to you.